Okay, I think we are the live. A couple of minutes late for the stream, but then again, streaming 2 weeks in a row. What a shock. It's unusual for Errol to actually stick to a streaming schedule. Um, I will be starting some more open source software PhD work, and maybe we'll see if we have any contributions to make. Or maybe we'll think about doing some work for hackathons or something like that. But I'm just finishing off some of my morning routine, or some tasks from this morning, which are largely about cleaning up my space and kind of reorganizing a little bit. So I might be doing some of that as we go, and I'm just checking off some work messages off of my mobile device. Good grief, sometimes. This one? Yeah, there we go. And then we'll do what we're gonna do on stream at first is we're gonna I have a morning routine item that I actually forgot to do yesterday because it wasn't I forgot to write it down on my to-do list because I've only just started only just picked it up again. But I try and do one scenario of the 1,000-year-old vampire journaling TTRPG game. I try and do like one of those a day. Just because, it gets me in the mood for kind of writing and thinking creatively. And it's fun. And the prompts are really, really good. And maybe I'll talk a little bit about my vampire that I'm working on a little bit. But yeah. Sorry, I just double checking a number of things for work, or like leftover things from work. So let me just get that. Okay, so, and then we'll jump right in to some 1,000-year-old vampire. Let's do that. My mobile phone, which is a Pixel, one of the, I can't remember actually which Pixel version it is kind of getting to the point where I might need to replace it soon. It's starting to get a little annoying and a little slow. I want notifications. Where's the notifications from this application? Oh, good grief, I do not know. Oh, good grief, applications and trying to figure them out. Do not know. Cleared. There we go. Notifications is under just an icon, the bell icon. I forget that that. What's the date today? It's the 9th of April, 9th of the 4th. Perfect. Okay, sure. Okay. That's good. Oh, I don't want to turn on the lamp. Okay, so let's jump in with some 1,000-year-old vampire to get the writing brain started. So I use this. I'm using this little journal. It's actually not that thick, so I think the 1,000-year-old vampire will end up spilling out into definitely another journal. But the reason I use this journal is I was in Japan in 2022, and I went to a lovely like bookbinding class in the evening in Kyoto, and I actually made this book, and I don't quite remember I think this might be old. It's either old kimono fabric or old obi fabric or something like that. But the the bookbinding place has been obviously doing it for many tens of years, possibly even longer. And the guy was like a super old, lovely grandpa who spoke very little English, and I speak very little Japanese. His daughter was there doing a lot of the translation, but he was so helpful, and it's such a precise and beautiful sort of art to do the like gluing of the book binding and adding in like the ribbon in the spine and doing the sewing of the like pages before you add the covers and do the kind of spine. But obviously it was, well, not obviously, but it was the first time that I'd ever done bookbinding, or at least for a good number of years done bookbinding. And they were incredibly patient with me and my partner trying to make our books. But this is the book that I use for 1,000-Year-Old Vampire. It feels accurate that I would use kind of a handmade book for a journaling RPG. Okay, and Tofu the cat is being very annoying today. What is wrong, Tofu? You want to come inside? Okay, come on. It's very windy, so I don't think the cats like it outside today. So with 1,000-Year-Old Vampire, if you haven't played it before, Tofu, destroying things, leave. Go on, Tofu, get out of here. I'm busy. It tells you in the first few pages like how to play the game, what you need. You actually don't need dice to play this at all. You can play it with a d10 and a d6 if you want to roll for your pages, and or there's like a way that you can like pick and randomize a number. I think at the back there might be like a way of kind of randomly picking a number. Possibly. I haven't actually looked at the back of the game. There's a group play mode as well, which is fun. And yeah, it's a really like nice journaling game. So if anybody is looking for, I see there is now a person in the stream. If anyone is looking for a nice journaling game, 1,000-Year-Old Vampire is very, very good. It's incredibly well written, the prompts. So we're going to do 2 prompts because I missed my prompt yesterday. And I'm only like maybe 6 or 7 prompts in to 1,000-Year-Old Vampire. But yeah, it tells you all at the beginning of the book. And there's a PDF version that you can download if you don't want to purchase a physical book, although the physical book is really beautiful. Tells you how to play at the beginning, and then I sort of mark where I am in my prompts. So far, I have created a vampire that is from the Middle East in early 1000 BCE. Is, let me see. Is the daughter of a trader and merchant and gets turned into a vampire, and also turns her attendant into a vampire because they fall in love and she wants her to live forever. So there's a whole like vampire love story. And so far my vampire has had some injuries happen to her. She has had an injury to her eye, and she's also had an injury to one of her arms already. And I don't know how many years old she is at this point. She's probably now, because the last prompt that I came up against was that a mortal family, generations of the same mortal family serve you, and descendants of that character, of the mortal character, end up being your servitors of the lineage resource. So I ended up deciding that she passes on her once she kind of hits like in her hundreds and she hasn't aged. visibly. She sort of now has to pass business on to mortals who serve her so that she can continue to live in relative like comfort as a vampire and not gain suspicion of not aging. But she's definitely had a few run-ins with a few immortals and vampires. But we're going to roll our dice. I'm going to use some really lovely new dice, which I will show the camera a little bit better once I pick them out. I'm going to use these really lovely, beautiful green dice that my partner got me. They're very beautiful. But you roll a d6 and you roll a d10. D10. Very pretty dice. And you subtract the d6 from the d10 numbers wise, and then if it's a positive number, you move forward in the book. If it's a negative number, you move back in the book. There are 3 prompts on each page, so you don't have to repeat the same prompt if you do end up on the same page that you've been on before. And you can choose from 3 different prompts. And I think even if you somehow end up on the same page more than 3 times, then you can skip pages. It doesn't nobody's going to tell you off, or nothing's going to happen if you don't want to respond to the same prompts again. But okay, so the last we left off, my 1,000-year-old vampire character, she had also just started to record her memories in her own diary in the game, in the world where she exists, in like where she is, and she can hold 5 memories in that diary. And the whole sort of idea of 1,000-year-old vampire as a journaling game is like exploring what it means to like lose memories as you age. So you can only keep 5 memories in your journal at once, and you strike out the things that you write as you kind of gain more memories, or you recognize that you forget those things. And you can choose which things you forget and remember, and they don't necessarily, you could remember something from like your very far past, and then there could be like this whole area where you forget and then remember something more recent. But the idea is that you can only record 5 memories. I think the idea is that you can only record 5 memories at a time. Yeah. So she's just started recording her memories on woven tapestries that her newly sort of the mortal characters that are serving her have started to weave for her, or like embroider for her, as thanks for like passing on this wealthy merchant business of her family history to them, or like entrusting them with the management of that. Okay, so let's roll some dice and we'll see what happens. Oh, okay, we're going backwards because we got a 6 on the d6 and a 4 on the d10, so we're -2, so we need to move 2 prompts backwards. So 1, 2, so we're here, we're on page 11, we've moved back to page 11. Have I done this one before? I think I might have. No, maybe I haven't. I only just started recording like the pages that I get to in my actual written diary. Because I started to forget which pages I had gotten to. No, actually, I don't think I've done this page 11 prompt. No, I don't think so. So we'll do the first prompt on page 11. So let's write down. How do we do this? We do page. So let's write down page 11, and the prompt is that we're going to write before, and they don't have to be, it doesn't have to, you don't have to write like pages and pages for each prompt. You can write something like a single response. The prompt is, how do you find solace from the raging hunger within? You may lose one checked or unchecked skill. One checked or unchecked skill. So my skills that I have are being able to hide. I've got good ability to hide. I've got financial savvy, allure, agility. Also have some other skills which are less like beneficial skills, which are bloodthirsty and ashamed. How do you find solace from the raging hunger within you? Lose one checked or unchecked skill. I've got some skills that I unchecked. Oh no, wait, I don't have skills that I unchecked. I've only unchecked resources so far. How do I find solace from the raging hunger within? So I think, what's the name of my vampire as well? I think the name of my vampire is Amira. So let's say I find solace from the raging hunger within by drowning in memories of my former mortality and days and nights spent with my love, Ravani. Ravani was her attendant, like her personal attendant that she turned into a vampire when shortly after she was turned into a vampire to make her immortal, and Ravani was horrified by this whole situation and ran many hundreds of years ago. Okay, so that's the first prompt that I've done. And I'll put a little line underneath it. So you just kind of write a little response to the prompt. And that's how you play 1,000-Year-Old Vampire. Let's roll the dice again and see if we actually go forward this time. No, got another 6 on the d6 and I got a 5 on the d10. So that's minus 1, right? -1, so I go back 1 page. I've only gone back pages for the last like 3 prompts. It's funny. 6 minus 5. Wait, no, 5 minus 6 is -1, yeah. Okay, 10. Oof, this is a rough prompt. I like this prompt though. It goes to show, it shows you like the brutality sometimes of a 1,000-Year-Old vampire. So the prompt that I just got is on page 10. So first let's write that down. 10 page. The stars pinwheel above you in the night. The seasons are a blur. You are as an automaton, unconscious of the passage of decades. A century passes. Strike out a memory and strike out all mortal characters. So I lose the memory of, like, I lose the recognition of all mortal characters. So 100 years pass in a blur and stupor. I feed, hunt, toil, dream of days gone, but they begin to lose their edges and blend like the smoke from my indulgences. There we go. Who are you again? Okay, so there we go. And let's strike out all mortal characters. So I have to basically go back in my book. And every time I meet an immortal or a mortal, I put next to them like mortal or immortal, just so that I remember them. Or, like I, as in Errol, remembers whether they're mortal and immortal. And also I write down when I gain marks. So marks are like physical things that happen to your vampire. So I've lost the ability to use my left arm, or my vampire has lost the ability to use her left arm. So that's one mortal struck out, 2 mortals struck out. I know there's more. So that's an immortal. I am found by one of my new kin. Yes, that's an immortal. But sometimes you end up having to kind of go back, and your sort of diary ends up really like quite messy. I think that's the whole point, though. I need to strike out a memory. I think I struck out this one. This memory is how I lost the ability to use my left arm. But it's a... No, maybe I don't want to lose that memory. Okay, I think I want to lose this memory, actually. So this is when I first met Mortal, the mortal in the family that now serves me. It's also the first time I've used a particular alias name, but it's also a memory of when Ravani, the attendant that was the attendant to my vampire, that she turned into a vampire, I learned that she's been spreading information about how I am cursed, which hurt my vampire. So I think my vampire wants this memory gone, essentially. She doesn't want to remember that her the person that she used to love no longer loves her. Resource. Oh, I need to strike out a resource. I think she loses her agility and a bit more, just because she has lost the ability to use her left arm. So that's immortal. These are immortals that she's forgotten. Malbec is immortal, I think. Marcus is another immortal. Ravani is she still remembers Ravani, but she doesn't remember the memory of when Ravani started being awful. Who's Malbec? Tries to stop me and Ravani. Oh, I killed Malbec. So I can't... Well, I strike out the knowledge of him. Like, he was immortal, right? Malbec? I think Malbec's my brother. My mortal brother. Or was my mortal brother, because he'd be well... Even if I hadn't killed him as a vampire, he would be dead. Yes. My eldest brother, a dull man who is changeable and impressionable. I killed him quite early on. This is why 1,000-Year-Old Vampire is such a fun game. Okay, there's a fair few mortals that Emira forgets, but there we go. That's my 1,000-Year-Old Vampire task done. There we go. Let's put it on my TTRPG shelf. There we go. And actually, the other thing that I'm going to do while I'm on stream that isn't PhD work just yet is, and then I'll leave the rest of the cleaning up for later and then do some PhD stuff, is I also got these campfire card deck. I'm gonna find one and place put a question in my 2 D&D servers. Cool. Okay, so if you're curious about what this is, it's really cool actually. If you ever want to do character building or just like question asking, it's like a load of cards that have different like questions on. When I ran D&D games, I would use these so I used to run a bi-weekly game, so every other week, and on the in-between weeks I would post a question for my players just to get them sort of thinking and sharing more about their characters and trying to build that team cohesion outside of the game, if you know what I mean, and also like outside of interactions like in session. Maybe that one's a bit controversial. This one's good. I'm gonna try this one in my D&Ds, in my D&D servers. Post them in there and see what folks think. Absolutely optional to respond to. Oh, I shouldn't close the box because I've got a card out. Okay. Let's also just really quickly take this here. And do so this is what we're going to be reading. I grab this. Yeah, that's just my desktop. And what we're going to do over here is no, we're not going to do that just yet. Okay. Cool. Let's do this. Okay, there all done. Okay. That's that done. And then I'll finish cleaning up once I have finished the stream. So the first thing we're going to do on stream today is we're actually going to finish annotating this paper here. So on our task, on the task list, we are doing this reading list section. So and then I need to populate this reading list a little bit more. Then we still have to do edits, and then let's actually edits and then email. And then we also want to do new form for diary studies. Oh, and then the other thing that we want to do is hackathon observation, message design folks in Discord and ask if they want to participate. And then I also want to check on date end of hackathon. Okay, because I think that's soon. Review folder, review bookmarks folder. Cool, there we go. Okay, so this paper is Framework for Governance in Open Source Communities, and I've gotten past the abstract into this sort of section here, and I've made like a few different comments, but I want to see if I can get through the rest of the paper. I don't actually know how long this paper is because I haven't scan read it yet. So I think I was, where did I put my last comment? No, that one's that one. I think I was here with communication and collaboration. It's really interesting because the first part of this, the introduction of this paper has like basically, well, in this first section talked about like, in the abstract talked about well-designed open source software, which was quite funny, and then like successful collaboration and things like that, mechanisms of control. And then I really wanted to look up whether Donaldson and Davis were people about like early participatory design stuff. Donaldson and Davis, human behavior. Let's just see human behavior, because when you don't cite the work, you're not toward stewardship for a theory of management. Maybe this is what they. Oh, okay. So it's assuming. The stewardship approach. There we go. Okay, right. A new perspective to understand the existing relationships between ownership and management of the company. Okay. (1991). What is stewardship theory in management? Back in. Okay, we could read a Medium article from somebody, but we could actually try and find the. Maybe it is this one. Sure. How long are we looking? Okay, right. Yep, same. Volume 22, number 28 pages. Okay, that's not too bad. Preview, log in through your library. Okay, we'll log in and download that later. Or maybe we'll just read a summary of the actual paper. If we try and read all of the papers that we need to read. Or all of the papers that other papers reference. We're gonna get into a deep and dark hole of paper reading. Abstract agency theory. Oh, this is okay. So Stuart theory, agency theory. So this is somebody. Wait, Donaldson and Davis are the authors of this other paper, 1991. Okay, so is stewardship theory maybe as a counterpart to agency theory, maybe? Good grief, I don't actually really want to read the full paper. I just kind of want to get an understanding of what it is. So maybe we will have a look at this person's Medium article. Thanks, Adiker. Back in 1981, Donaldson and Davis introduced stereotype theory and management theory, role of managers in the organization. Sure. Managers are supposed to act in the best interests of the company. Okay. Well, so interesting. Why is this starting points for this discussion? Workers are motivated by not. Okay, so yeah, because looking at this in the terms of open source and like governance, it kind of could apply, but maybe it's not a direct comparison, right? Because not all open source software is a company or a company in its structure, like in the nature of the structure that it subscribes to. Although it is like there is a structure, even if it's like aiming towards structurelessness. An extension to agency theory, okay, is developed so that managers can act in the interest of the company. Challenge the approach that managers are all selfish and greedy to fill their motives. Certain times managers exhibit stewardship behavior. Oh, pardon me. Okay. Oversimplifies the complexities of managerial behavior. Okay, interesting. I'm more interested as to why this paper references this. Maybe because the projects that they're looking at are like the Linux, Apache, and Perl, which I guess you could say are the most company-like of open source because they're large projects. Okay, these things kind of make sense in an open source lens. Cooperative governance. Okay, this might be why this is referenced then. Applicate. Oh. Interesting. So, okay, so this is saying that stewardship theory is actively, what's the word, incorporated into these kinds of organizations. Okay. Ethical decision making and balancing the interests of stakeholders. That makes sense as a thing that open source struggles with. Okay, so this is funny because this is like whomever this person works for is selling this. Okay, right. We understand stewardship theory a little bit more. So let's go back to the paper. Additionally, new analyses show that the open source communities follow a life cycle. The internal organizational structure is changing by going through different life cycle stages. Do we have figures 58 and 67? What's the life cycle? The implementation of hierarchical structures, which can be observed in practice, ensures that there are adequate controlling and coordination mechanisms amongst all organizational units. Interesting. I think the comment that I want to put on this life cycle is, does OSS progress in this life cycle willingly? Does OSS / the community? My sort of hunch would be not always willingly, right? Okay. The aim of this article is to examine central structures and coordination patterns. The results. Studies help understand the role of governance within their community, evaluation, systemic review, literature, empirical, blah, 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 blah. Focus is to identify mechanisms, open source specific governance tools. One of the most important currents, they are non-monetary nature. Good. Okay. Therefore the question has to be answered by which incentives, absence of money is. Okay, sure. Subsequently drive the need for governance actions or control. OSCs? I don't know what OSCs actually means. Did they? Open source communities. Okay, let's see. OSCs could mean a number of different things depending on your contexts. Okay. Motivation factors in chapter 3. So chapter 2 examines specific conditions for governance. Chapter 3, motivation factors, life cycle stages, positive value. Oh my gosh, why are all open source papers or all open source investigations research always so focused on like efficiency and increase? Why always the focus on it's a very like capitalistic view of open source software. It's just funny. It's like not every intervention that gets made into open source increases efficiency or should increase efficiency, right? Hey CB, nice to see you. We're actually doing some PhD reading today. Just talking out loud as we think about open source. How did we get to? To what traditional governance theories apply, a holistic view of stakeholder assumption that open source actors differ in their motivation. These motivations are related to their function and duties within the community. For which are classified to different open source actors based on functional characteristics. Additional information from analyses. Summary. Okay, so we're into chapter 2 now. And as they said, chapter 2 examines the specific conditions for governance in open source communities. Open source software differs from commercially produced software among other criteria in the following ways. I'm trying to persuade my... What even is efficiency? I don't... Yeah, it's a pyramid scheme, or however it is. Efficiency is multi-level marketing schemes. I don't know. It's the society trying to sell us or convince us something. My brain sees through my tricks. Yes. I don't know. Efficiency sort of also assumes arbitrary agreement on level of quality sometimes as well. Yeah. So what does open source what things differ in open source than commercially? The permission for free propagation of software. Yeah, sure. The free availability of the source code. Interesting use of the source code. Okay. The right to change the source code and the free propagation of the software license for anyone who wants to use the program. Sure. So open source software differs in the following ways. Okay, so this primarily is talking about, it's weird because this chapter heading is general characteristics of an open source community, and then it's sort of, okay, so I guess it's just opening with, this is how open source software differs from proprietary commercial software, and then they'll go into the community stuff, right? General public license is legally binding. Name parts of cells are subject to that. Yep. Development of free software on the basic concept of the development of free software. I just find the use of the word development interesting because it obviously has many different meanings depending on your context. Oh no, wait, and here's the context. The basic concept of development of free and open source code on the basis of volunteers. So they are equating the development of free open source software on the code part of things. That volunteers are not financially remunerated. Directly influences the organizational structure. Okay. Open source communities differ from common enterprises in their coordination. It's done on a voluntary basis. There are no guidelines. Oh, right, yeah. There are no guidelines regarding time and intensity of work. Interesting. Yes, largely true. Not always the case. Especially when we're talking about security vulnerabilities. Right? I can't think. I'm trying to think of what happens when there's like a open source software that doesn't have any funds whatsoever and there is a security vulnerability. There then are time guidelines, but I guess like not really. You could just not patch the security breach or the security vulnerability, and then it's up to the people that use the open source to patch it out or contribute. I don't know. Anyway. Okay. But largely true. Due to the decentralized computer-based value of creation process, personal contacts while working on these projects. Yes. Okay. Personal contacts while working on these projects take place only on a small scale. Marketable and competitive products. Linux, Apache, Mozilla, etc. This is made possible. The character. A common product is developed by a community or organization, but the individual parts are produced geographically decentralized. Communication and coordination of the project are based on modern communication technologies, which makes teamwork possible for members worldwide. Sure. I guess not always, but sure. Contributions required for further development of the software are sequential, meaning innovation. That's one of our buzzwords for the PhD, is based on preview development and does not making radical leaps. I guess people do typos in academic papers every now and then. Does not make radical leaps. That's true. That's actually interesting. I don't know if sequential, I really kind of sequential kind of feels a bit not quite right in my brain way of wording it. Agreed. Innovation in open source software is interfaces is sort of rarely engaged with beyond like technological hype, let's technological hype. Technological hype. So this is kind of like usually like the OSS is created by an innovator of their own experience, right? So a developer scratching their own itch, sort of thing. Like innovation doesn't necessarily follow like market innovation. Innovation doesn't often follow market innovation due to OSS not having a directly similar way of interacting with other as in comparison to the commercial software product market. So like I guess the thing that I'm trying to comment on here is like, while open source softwares have quote unquote competitors, their existence isn't like the primary driver for their continued existence isn't, I think, consciously about innovation as much as like commercial software is about competitive innovation, like who has the best product offering. But I find the use of the word innovation incredibly interesting across like open source stuff. And especially like when I'm thinking of, when I read these papers, I'm always thinking about the niche area of like humanitarian and human rights related open source software, and they have to, in even kind of even lesser degree, like sort of competitive nature, like that, like if there are more open source humanitarian and human rights related open source software for doing certain human rights and humanitarian activity, like objectively in the improving the world or benefiting humans, it's not bad to have multiple tools. I do think though that the open source software tool teams tend to struggle to break out of this like competitor modality, like this mindset, because obviously their continued existence is dependent on whether or not they are a used tool, open source software tool, and therefore they may cease to exist if they are unfunded or not funded, which is often like the where uncertainty comes into play around open source software with like humanitarian human rights stuff. It's like all of a sudden, if there is a better tool that does a humanitarian or human rights need, like services a need better, it's good, but also not good. Anyway, it's tricky. It's a tricky topic. Complementary because it arises to introduce synergies for the optimization of this kind of work can then be characterized as complementary because a rising number of solutions develop synergies for the optimization for the product. I guess, yeah, I understand this statement, right? So if an open source software tool started off as innovative and follows like a very sequential, as this paper says, not making radical leaps kinds of innovation, if we want to call that, or just progression or improvement, then other open source software can make those radical leaps in innovation at their birth slash conception creation, because as maybe this paper might go into, like, as open source software ages, it becomes labor to improve or maintain. So when new things get created, anyway, it's all profoundly complicated, I suppose, when you dig into it. Software programming can be divided into sub-projects, which can continue to be developed independently. Sure, like branches. Can I not move that up here? Yeah. Ooh. Cool. Yeah. Ooh. Okay, have I messed up? Oh gosh, what have I done? What have I done with the liquid text? Okay, there we go. Okay, I've done something strange to liquid text with that last comment. Here. That's actually... Sometimes liquid text is like one of those really... it's a really hard to use tool. Like, how do you even delete this thing here? Delete, 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 delete. You can't delete it. You're not allowed. Edit. The good old-fashioned edit. Delete. Let's just do loads of undos, shall we? There we go. Let's just leave it there. Can we try and move it? I just want to move it. I just want to move it like up here. I don't want to. Okay, it's fine like that. Software can be development with no. Software can be developed with no chronological order, meaning that elements or modules which are programmed later can be integrated into already active software. Modularity, I suppose, as long as there's no like conflicts. It can be. Yeah, project. Oh, sub-projects. Yeah, I guess like. Yeah. This could be also describing forking, right? Software program can be divided into sub-projects. I guess if you call it sub-projects, it kind of makes me think of like that it's still part when you use the word sub-project, when they use the word sub-projects, or forks. Because I would use different phrasing if I was trying to describe forks. I would probably like say software programming can be extended into like complementary projects by, and then I would use the word forking, and then like explain what forking is maybe in the paper. But it seems like this paper is trying to like refer to things without like calling them what they are, because they are jargon, and then but I would say like include the jargon and then explain the jargon, like forks and stuff. Maybe this confuses an overall project, yeah, with a single piece of software, right? Yeah, so like the I think that this is talking about like the software right now. Let's just keep reading and see whether it makes any more sense. This criteria of software development process in general and the open source projects in particular fulfill the necessary conditions which offer the participants of the project the most decision-making freedom. Okay, they can decide on their own or in which part of the project they will become involved, where they will complete their work, and oh gosh, liquid text, why? Liquid text, why are you so hard to use sometimes? It's done this weird thing where there we go. Where they complete their work and what resources they will contribute. I mean, yeah, sure. A high degree of self-determination of each individual user that is based on granular central for open source software communities to maintain the motivation of volunteering. Yeah, that's, yeah. Right, yeah. I guess so they've made the conclusion that if people couldn't have some degree of like decision making or a high degree of self-determination, then people wouldn't volunteer. And so self-determination is a fundamental prerequisite for governance in open source. That's tricky though. It sort of depends often, doesn't it, in reality? There are basically two sources in open source to motivate them to participate. The first is motivation of an extrinsic nature, which is quite important. Profit-oriented companies and is adopted there as a dominant control tool. Sure. Is it that they're talking about like when companies that use the open source software or that benefit from the open source software being good also contribute to it? And then there's other rewards of a material nature. Learner and Trio will attribute much individual motivation to reputation building. What does this mean in HUM/HR/OSS and /or for designers /non-code contributions? So if you really truly are being a really terrible, annoying cat today, it's the third or fourth time that you've wanted to go in and out. A second source. Intrinsic. Engaging in activity out of play. It's funny to read like the words pure pleasure in relation to contributing to open source. I don't know if like I would describe some contributions to open source as like pure obstinance or like pure like not pleasure, like pure like infuriated in the lack of like something in a project, or the it doesn't right, it feels odd to I guess like they've maybe heard from people like, yeah, I like contributing to open source, or I enjoy contributing to open source, but I think that enjoyment and / use of the word like is not I would be it's dubious that it's pleasure is the right word to describe it. I would kind of maybe describe it more as like the enjoyment or the like of it for me being more, I guess you could use like pride, like that you want something to be better / improved or done, and therefore the enjoyment and the liking of contributing is about the knowledge that you are able to contribute that, and then the success of that improving something, and therefore it being like about the value of the contribution, your own understanding of the value of the contribution that you have made being enjoyable. you have contributed big, like contributed in the big sense of the word, not the individual thing that you've contributed sense of the word. I'm just gonna put that in just like a funny green. I'm sure there are people out there that get a sense of pure pleasure from contributing to open source, but I've not met one of them. I have yet to meet one of them. I'd be assumed that the context of greatly interested. Categorize community individuals. Okay. Ugh. Sorry, I just read read a section that made my blood boil. So this section was getting interesting. It was talking about how open source community members and contributors often kind of move around different kind of categorized group types. They float around. No one individual fulfills functions. Usually one individual fulfills functions in different groups and therefore is a member of several categories. And then they describe the three member groups as bug fixers, programmers, and coordinators. And it just feels like they kind of wanted a term that says everything else through like this word of coordinators. Like the everything else, not code. And I think it does bug fixing and programming, code writing, like a disservice in and of itself, because then it makes it basically sort of like extracts the act of other things like coordinating, thinking, problem solving, communicating. It extracts that skill from the like skill of bug fixing or programming, right? It does everyone a disservice to extrapolate, like to extract that from out as like a separate thing. But then again, it does sort of describe that they move around these different places. But I still think that there's a little thing here which I'm not sure what okay, so they're going to describe these roles as well. Contribute irregularly, rarely to the open source organizations, so to the overarching organization of things. They're actually software users who communicate errors to the community. That, interesting. So I would categorize the communication of bugs is like part of like a community initiated user insight sort of research role. Self-reporting is average. More than 75% of all open source members are represented by bug fixers. Central companies finding software errors and deficiencies, communicating these to programs and managers. Furthermore, many bug fixers provide solutions to the problems that they find. Yes. So the tricky thing here is in my experience, these are not always like functional code bug reports to fix journeys. journeys. I cannot spell. Often these, often like underneath the bug fixer type, we have users that don't like and/or prefer a different like orientation or like mode to the software, and believe that changing the usability slash UI slash interaction is a bug fix. So this is like a fundamental, this is like a fundamental lack of like knowledge around knowledge around usability in software. Like I don't think often that these things are like malicious. There's like, oh, I think this would work better if it looked or functioned or did this other thing, and it's like actually you're fixing a problem that is a problem for you, or you consider it a problem, but it's actually like a preferred state for you as a user. And the assumption there is that often I encounter in my work doing design in open source that most individual users regard other users as themselves. So something that improves the thing for themselves will inevitably improve it for other users, and it's kind of just a default thinking. Not as much anymore though. It's, you know, things are changing and getting better. But it's like this kind of shows like a lack of like considering usability as like a critical like category of community, open source community, like contributors. Modified and optimized to whom's tastes. Or more accurately, like to what user research. Like benchmarked to what user research. Optimizing open source software for better usage, interesting, is the most important incentive for bug fixing. Other motivational, increasing reputation. These motivational factors, they can therefore not be controlled directly by management of open source organizations, in contrast to management and profit-oriented. Target use of governance environments can increase the commitment of bug fixes if these instruments are adequate and specific. Better. Oh, this is such an interesting thing. Like, okay, there we go. Programmers, the second group of community members, develop open source software communities. Develop open source community software. Am I realizing that this is about specifically building software for use by open source software communities? Because that makes you think that it is. But anyway. By contributing their knowledge, in many cases, programmers worked as bug fixers at the beginning of an open source project. Programmers are characterized by working more regularly and more frequently than bug fixers. 8.5% of all open source workers belong to this category. One core motivational aspect of programmers comprises of signaling knowledge to potential employers of profit-oriented companies. Sure. Absent in the design profession. It's such a, but like, I mean, reading that sentence makes me think, but like, who made it a requirement or a near requirement to make open source contribution a desired, highly desired, if not essential aspect of like a programmer's like resume? I feel like it was kind of like, I would love to know like the exact history of like when that became like started being like a metric to which profit-based companies like started assessing like potential hires. Or is it just about like a virtue signaling to the other programmer that is going to be like interviewing and hiring you? Is it kind of just like a in crowd signaling, like, you know, a social capital thing? Is it like a social capital? Let's see, like the social capital of signaling. You do X skill. Right? So I guess like I think this paper is kind of, it's got like it's drawing some interesting lines, and I think that it's obviously like I have a lot of sympathy for the person that's done this research and written this paper, because it's always incredibly hard to draw lines within anything. They're attempting to draw some like lines, but I think what they're trying to describe are like, they're not necessarily describing like they're essentially just trying to describe level of involvement. And I think the thing that I'm going to be interested to see if is in this programmer's explanation is whether or not programmers are the ones that work on things that I would describe as like feature development more frequently than, say, a bug fixer. Because could make the reasonable assumption that somebody that contributes irregularly and rarely, and that is mostly focused on their own problems or errors that arise in their own work. So programmers are itch scratchers. Like I would kind of describe them as like maybe the feature developers. Like, I want to either explore this part of the technology or improve this part of the technology for itch scratchers, right? So interesting actually, I've never thought of feature development within open source more as the itch scratching side of things. It's almost like bug fixers are putting ointment on like bug bites that they experience, whereas like programmers have a parasite that they want to resolve. So it's a weird comparison or analogy, but like programmers are the ones that have things about the open source that get under their skin, like that are not surface level things about like just being able to function it. There has to be some, the itch scratcher. Programmers are much more integrated into organizational coordination and communication processes, as opposed to somebody who gets more involved and helps improve things that aren't specifically helping them. Governance tools should ensure that there are coordination mechanisms which facilitate working processes and communication among other programmers, bug fixers, or managers. Founders and programmers in open source projects often change roles as the system grows to managers. Their tasks are extended to a strategic focus, such as implementing coordination mechanisms. Often these managers are elected by the community or some of the registered, or by some of the registered community members. Elections, and sometimes just because nobody else will do it, and sometimes just by default of being the founder of the open source project, you end up as the strategic focuser. Even when I think the tricky thing here is when the strategic focus is mixed with the itch scratching that isn't, or the bug fixing more, if you want to use the way that this person is describing bug fixing versus programming. What do I want to say about strategic focus? It's kind of like, is this the risky area or life cycle where OSS projects can then become like dictatory by founder. Oh, look, a life cycle diagram. Introduction, growth, maturity, decline, or revive. Interesting. Cool. Managers are paid employees in companies or universities. Are they? Well, yeah. I mean, most of the time an open source software like founder has a job somewhere else, and are assigned. And is it? No, that's not always the case, right? They're not always assigned to work on open source projects. Motivation of managers as well as of programmers can be traced back to career plans. This reason, reputation is important. It's financial. The classification of these three important member groups. You haven't explained the other member group. You just explained two of them: bug fixers and programmers. You haven't talked about the coordinators. Is it because there's too much included in the coordinator function? I guess like so managers is what they're describing as the coordinators. Okay, interesting. Word usability has come up. I feel like usability and like in this context, the usability and understandability of governance processes, governance tools. I need to take a quick break, real quick. Be right back. Okay, can I do that? There we go. Okay. Let's continue. Number of downloads. Okay, they're using number of downloads to identify some life stages, which is fair. Annual growth of participant base. Contributor participant? Annual growth of user community. Growth in market share. Interesting. User satisfaction with the product. Interesting. Peer recognition of the project. They're difficult to measure. They sure are. Okay. The introduction stage is characterized by the generation of ideas by the founders. Core group negotiates an informal structure consisting... Oh, the life cycle stages of governance or of the project? Think of governance. The fun of programming. Interesting. So the introduction phase is usually very rarely where designers are involved. What did they say? The idea generation. Yeah, there we go. Amount of work. Oh, okay. This is the stage where people decide what they are going to be. Oh, we have a mention of interface designer. Uh-oh. Lesser functions? Yikes. Sustain the project. Better competing systems. Departure of founding members. Geez. Diverging concerns, yeah. Describe the different life cycle stages, but they do not explicitly discuss changing motivation of member groups within these stages. Yeah, I think those stages are interesting. It would also be really interesting, like, and this is absolutely nothing to do with my PhD. Somebody else needs to do a PhD on this. But understanding, like, of like whatever growth stages a open source software project like subscribes to or identifies with or is observed to be exhibiting characteristics of, but mapping like where conflict happens most regularly, or what kind of conflict happens, or what kind of discussion happens. Because I would imagine that in the introduction phase is often marked by like very much like agreement agreement amongst people initiating a project. Like either it's a single person that does not argue with themselves creating a project, or it's people that really do like tend to primarily like agree on the direction or what should be created. And then like growth is also usually seems like less conflict based. And the maturity seems to kind of maturity and decline or revival seem, in my gut feeling, is where like a lot of divergence diverging concerns they said here in the decline and revival stage. But I also think the maturity stage tends to be like where actually like more diverse perspectives come in, because it's mature and therefore established in some way and/or popular in some way, and therefore like it attracts more different kinds of people with different kinds of needs, and therefore you've got no longer got this as kind of described I think in other parts of the I don't think heterogeneous is the right word, but like homogenous like agreement. And it's really interesting because I think the maturity stage is often where governance actually happens. Like there might be like in the introduction and growth like things like code of conducts and things like that, but like maturity is like where governance tends to be like, oh no, we haven't got any governance processes, let's make some. Oh. Oh, don't want that. But, yeah. Okay, these feel like better. Well, that feels like a more understandable way of describing a bug fixer. Bug fixers participate in open source projects to obtain improved software for their own use. Programmers try to achieve higher internal and external level of reputation and want to improve their career chances. Additionally, they want to optimize software as long as they are intrinsically motivated. Managers want to increase their reputation as well, but they are also seeking monetary rewards. Both objectives are connected to the improvement of the software and increase in the quality of project. Although I would argue that managers often sometimes like feel a sense of like responsibility rather than necessarily increasing their reputation as like their primary thing. It's like, I created this thing, I want to make sure that if it continues to exist and grow, that it does that well. I would hope that they want that. Let's get into chapter 3, and then I think that might be getting close to the end of this paper. We're going to try and finish this paper by the end of the stream at 1. So we're going to go a little bit quicker. But the thing is, like, what of the other things that aren't bug fixers, programmers, or managers? Based on a holistic view. A main problem in implementing governance tools is considering which objectives exist for different members. Interesting. Also difficult if your has other functions outside of the 3 described in this paper. Papri. Governance mechanisms are implemented to avoid and solve these conflicts in conventional companies. The absence of a common main objective may lead to conflicts of interest in and among member groups. Interesting statement. Conflict of perspectives as well. Effectiveness of sanction mechanisms in open source communities may be questioned. There's no formal or existential dependence of the members on open source project. Exclusion of counterproductive members and the loss of reputation. Whew. I haven't heard this word be used in a hot second. Flamed. But I guess like maybe it's making a comeback in vernacular nowadays. Publicly named and judged by other community members. Oof. Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure, it happens. Oh, good grief. This is getting into some of the tricky parts of like open source software governance, which isn't... The thing I find interesting about reading this paper about general open source software governance is the hierarchical structure. Is this structure outsourced in the case of humanitarian and human rights open source software to the like abstract notion of the beneficiary or the like people we are helping with the open source software? So like in open source software, which is for coding, for development, for like in that sphere, your users are also your participants, your contributors. This is also the case, like, in the case of, I mean, like in humanitarian and human rights open source software, you also have a user and user contributor of a developer, especially if that is a open source software, a humanitarian human rights open source software that needs to be deployed and maintained in some way by somebody with technical knowledge. But the hierarchical structure of like what is good for the tool is outsourced to the people that are being helped by the tool, not the what is best for the configurers of the tool, i.e. the developer users. So like, while there is kind of like a hierarchical structure sometimes, or varying degrees of structures within open source software, like humanitarian human rights open source software, the way that the aspects of the software are talked about are in terms of like, what do these people need? How do we help these people better? Well, you know, it's kind of like a degree removed if those beneficiaries are not also part of the governance. So here is like a missing element of hum/hr OSS in that rarely are non-technical users or benefiters of the open source software included. Oh gosh, making a long paragraph. Included in the governance of that open source software, and it's kind of included via, like, we're talking like design practices, social design practices, social impact design practices. Good grief, my writing. Typing, terrible, awful. Bonfires, benefitter. I don't think benefitter is a word. But we're going to use it regardless. There we go. I feel like we need to bring back words like flame and stuff like that, just to combat all the like new vocabulary that's coming up that I struggle to understand. So I think I've just, you know, when you read something, you have a little brainwave. So this paper talks a lot about the involvement of open source. One of the key factors of like people being involved in open source, specifically people with coding skills, being the self-determinating nature of choosing what you work on, how you work on it, and when you work on it. And I think something that like I often try and think about what are the elements that contribute to conflict between the role of a user researcher designer type person and a coder developer type person. And if I would describe design as a practice, not in like a lofty terms, because design is flawed in many, many ways. And obviously there are designers out there that are designing in a very self-determined, non-evidence-based way, or non-insight and evidence-based way. But I think maybe one of these conflicts around when design enters into the open source space is it challenges self-determination of coders and developers, because you come in as a designer with the user determination. So you aren't speaking as I am a fellow user and developer, and I think that these things should be improved in this way. You come in with a very like a perspective of what do users broadly want, and how do we determine our focus and needs and what we work on from a user perspective, which may not be the thing that the developers want to self-determine the work on, right? So a concrete example of this may be like a bug fixer type person raises a bug, saying, for instance, something like, I don't think the option X should be in file menu Y because I look for that in a different file menu, or I consider that to be a setting or something. And they raise a bug because they think it's an error, that something exists somewhere where it shouldn't exist, because they would prefer it to exist somewhere else, but there's an understanding that, or there's a assumption that other people would also find that useful. And a designer kind of comes in with a, let's prove that or disprove that. And so it halts that self-determined, I'm going to fix this problem because I've found a problem and it's a problem for me type of thing. But that like isn't always going to be the case for like bug fixes. But I think it kind of it raises like a tension in how open source software is initially built, without often the governance or like the checks and balances of, you are raising a bug about this. Is it a bug that is broadly mutually beneficial? How do you figure that out? And so are designers coming in and kind of really like challenging and stripping away like something which is incredibly vital, like to involvement, which is an interesting thing to think about, which is maybe you could hypothesize why a lot of designers aren't involved in the initial stages. As well as like, yeah, lots of other misconceptions of how design functions, why design functions. Direct governance, indirect governance, social governance. Cool, yeah. I feel like user needs live here. Pardon me. We're going to skim read the most of the rest, because one of the things that liquid text does, it's over here actually. It's not always obvious like where you are in the document in liquid text, because it's actually on the left hand side here, which is usually looking on the right hand side for. Yeah. Let's read about the Linux meetings. Oh, okay, they don't go into much detail. In the introduction phase and on the levels of bug fixers and programmers where coordination structures are weaker, social control is of high importance. That's interesting. And designers have very little social capital in this space. Designers have very minimal or weak social capital in open source software spaces, and therefore struggle to exert social governance. We're finding out all kinds, or like we're discovering all kinds of like insights, potential insights in this paper. This is kind of I wasn't expecting much from this paper, to be honest, but it has been interesting. Okay, let's go into the life cycles and governance. Oh, look. A table. We love a table. The introduction phase, idea generation, focus, structure, division of labor, coordination examples. What's Nutella? I really want to look up Nutella. Nutella. I'm just going to get Nutella. Okay. It's a peer-to-peer network in 2000. Interesting. Oh wow. 1.81 million computers. Jeez. File sharing network. I love that it's just called Nutella. Makes me laugh. Okay, interesting. I don't know much about that technology, but I love that it's called Nutella. Good to know. Okay, therefore, character timing of instruments. Oh gosh. I actually, maybe a controversial opinion, because a lot of like design popular design stuff, thought, theory, whatever, is that design should be involved as early as possible, as frequently as possible. And I actually kind of think from reading this, if this is accurate and true, the introduction phase, in the introduction phase, introducing designers into that phase, it would be more detrimental to a open source software project, because if design challenges self-determined programming and the intrinsic nature of the interest, then introducing that kind of function is gonna not encourage like the things that happen in the introduction phase. Whereas in the growth phase, where specialization increases, that seems to be like very early on in the growth phase might be where the best place for designers are. So you don't stifle the introduction phase, but you help the growth phase grow in a way that is healthy for maturity. But often the design comes in the maturity phase, from my sort of experience and knowledge. Or maybe the introduction phase isn't like the the designer is not involved in the same activities as the programmers, but they are involved in the observation, knowledge gathering phase in order to introduce their function into the growth phase. But I guess you can't really sort of like put definite timings on different things. Right, we're going to go over time a little bit in the stream. We're going to try and finish this paper. What did I highlight? Users. Yeah, do more communication. Too many rules and policies reduce. Maturity, specialization, 20 different software projects. No longer include programming. They coordinate, yeah. Which a feeling of community for all members. To see loss of transparency. Decreases community, yeah. Yeah, okay. Various self-determined programming isn't constrained by too many roles. So again, it's really important that design doesn't stifle the revive or decline stage. But there's also all these other things that involve. Interesting. Okay, we're in the conclusion now. Okay, well, we finished this paper, and now we're into all the different references. Yeah, that was a good and interesting read. I made some notes. I think I need to write up in a MD document, a .md document, which I need to start a new one for this. If I start, and then, so this is framework for governance in open source communities. And we'll save it, and we'll save it. Thanks, Sublime Text. I'm sorry, when maybe I'm not a poor student, I will donate money to you. Promise. And then we'll just save the document, and then we'll write up some of the notes that we wrote up in this, and then we'll also download the Twitch stream so that, oh god, my spelling, terrible. And we'll add the stream video on the YouTube. Link it in the MD document. Source communities. Paper link. And then how have we done this? Oh yeah, we just did that, and then we started writing about it. Okay. Right, we're gonna finish the stream. We started a couple of minutes late, but we will finish a couple of minutes late, but off stream I'm going to just write up and add to my PhD repository I've got a folder which I think is still currently called paper analysis in the actual public repo, but I do believe that I made a change to the name of the folder. Because I don't just do paper analysis in there, I do paper and lecture and various other analysis, so it will change names soon. But that's where you can read a lot of the notes and write-ups of papers and stuff. But thanks for joining me on the stream, folks, and reading the paper with me and thinking about open source, communities and governance. It was actually a really interesting read. Yeah, see you around, CB. Okay, let's end this stream.